recently you and I had done a taping about Tiki Tatsu-Ya in Austin, Texas.
Yeah, that was 20 minutes ago.
Oh, well. In the internet world, it's going to be a week, but okay. Okay, Ray. 20 minutes ago. Some time ago, in the recent past, we were talking about Tiki Tatsu-Ya, easy for me to say, in Austin, Texas.
And the new tiki bar that's in Austin.
Yeah, and what I really was going on about was the infusion of Japanese and Japanese-American elements into tiki and how successful that was.
Yep.
Which got me thinking, and also got me on a riff that made your eyes roll about sumo, which made me think about Japanese-American company called Otagiri Mercantile Company. It was a Japanese-American company based in San Francisco, but they manufactured their mugs in Japan.
Okay.
And what's interesting was
Not China.
No, not China, but
Japan.
Yeah,
Okay.
but if you think about the 60s and 70s, things weren't made in China back then. They were, this was, the communist cultural revolution was going on. China wasn't proto-capitalist, communist, whatever it is today. Back then, everything was made in Japan anyway. Many of the products and goods and services in the 60s and 70s. And Otagiri OMC, I'll call them Mercantile Company. OMC, again, was, I believe, Japanese-American company based, as I said, in San Francisco. And what's fascinating is many of us who collect mugs have run across their mugs because
and probably not even knew it.
Not even knew it.
Okay.
Or maybe you knew it because what I was thinking about was what started me was this is a mug called the Sumo Flip.
Let me see this thing.
Yeah.
The Sumo Flip. What's this?
So it's a OMC mug, and if you look, it has the OMC sticker on it, I think, or does it? Maybe it doesn't.
Miyako Hotel, San Francisco.
So this is in Japantown in San Francisco. Hotel.
Japantown, not Chinatown.
Not Chinatown, Japantown.
Sumo.
And was a drink that they served at this, I guess, in Japantown Hotel. And I don't know what exactly the drink was, but it's easy to get me to talk about sumo, and I love sumo, but we won't revisit that discussion. And then a flip is a drink, usually not with egg whites, but whole eggs. It's a cocktail, which normally would be served in a little coupe or little champagne, old-fashioned champagne glass. I don't know.
But this drink was in this thing. Right?
I don't know. It says Sumo Flip, and I can't figure out what drink they had. Maybe they had a flip, which would be a whole egg drink. It's a rather large mug for a drink that's normally served, You wouldn't usually do the traditional tiki dirty pour in this with ice, but maybe they did. But being a native of San Francisco myself and loving sumo, I love it. And again, it got me thinking about the Japanese infusion, but then it got me thinking about OMC. And as I said, we've probably all encountered OMC because right here I have a classic, the classic three-headed tiki bucket mug and a classic peanut mug.
I've seen these mugs before.
Sure.
I've seen both of these mugs.
And these are
usually, if you're going to find a tiki mug like out in the wild, like at a thrift store, it's going to be one of these too.
It's exactly right.
This is nicknamed the peanut mug because it kind of looks like a peanut.
Yep.
Oh, that's a Maori warrior though.
Mm-hmm. And the bucket, there are different sizes of bucket.
Now they both say the Islander, but I've seen this mug for like other tiki bars.
Exactly. And that's what I wanted to talk about.
So what's the story then?
So OMC produced mugs, I want to say from maybe 1955 to late 80s, maybe even in the 90s. And I'm just checking to see if they have any stickers in the bottom.
I think it's Trader Dick's.
So what happened was OMC would have these mugs, and like a Tiki Farm, they might do bespoke mugs. Harvey's had a bucket mugs.
I think Harvey's had this.
Lake Tahoe. Harvey's Lake Tahoe.
So I mean, look at so.
So
whether they'd have the mug, and then they just
OMC would have the mug,
and they just stamp.
And
on
then the restaurant would say, "I like this mug. I like this mug. I like this mug. Can you stamp it for my particular restaurant or bar?" And that's why they're so ubiquitous. That's why, like you say, you go to a thrift store and you see these everywhere, and they're relatively inexpensive. OMC did, I think, do some bespoke mugs, meaning custom mugs, for because OMC really kind of mass-produced these, and then they would stamp them for a particular restaurant or bar. But their claim to fame is twofold. They produced the original Bali High cannibal mug.
Oh.
Now, whether that was specifically for Bali High or whether that was hey, Bali High, do you want to use this?
Yeah.
And they produced the original Bob's. That's their most
their
most classic and probably collectible, expensive mug would be an original San Francisco and later Sacramento Bob's mug. And in fact, if you look at the original mugs, they were most San Francisco, and then when there's a Sacramento one too, you can find the Sacramento stamped. And OMC would produce essentially the same mug. They had different editions, I think, of the Bob, but they're the original Bob manufacturer.
The question I asked though is, did these restaurants care that, like, okay, here's our mug, but there's another place down in another city that's using the same exact mug?
I don't think they did, obviously.
Or they're just like, we need a Tiki mug, sure.
But I don't know that there was a craft Tiki mug movement like there is today. Artists who will go to Monk Tiki or work with Monk Tiki or work with Tiki Farm and produce a mug much like we do today.
Okay.
I think it was, you want to have a tiki bar, tiki restaurant, Chinese restaurant with tiki drinks, any one of the above.
Yeah.
And we're going from Japanese into Chinese influence here. You can have it stamped with your mug. Remember, too, we're talking, these are all stamped, these three mugs, all OMC mugs from the Islander in Stockton, California.
Yeah, and actually this one does say Islander on the back.
And they all have Islander on it.
And I literally, look at it, and my buddy Travis, for Christmas, actually gave me a lamp. And this is the lamp.
Oh, cool.
This tiki. It's made out of metal, but this is the tiki.
Yeah. And that's the Islander, that was the Hurricane mug, and it's also known as the Khan Tiki mug after Thor Heyerdahl, the Norwegian who built a craft whose theory was you could go from that people from South America populated Polynesia and that you could actually get a boat to do it. And in 1947, he actually built a boat. My dad loved this story.
Yeah.
That's why I know it so well. And he had a classic sort of tiki on the sails that has been replicated, including at the Islander in Stockton. The Islander, and this is I think it's maybe a modern version. I got this on Etsy, but a cutout of the A-frame Islander restaurant. But the marquee, I remember this when I was a teenager. I don't remember going into the Islander that much, although my parents went a lot when we moved from San Francisco to Stockton, California. But this is the classic.
Let me see this.
Classic mug. In fact,
so you could build this
little
your own little Islander.
Your own little A-frame paper Islander of Stockton.
And the people out there watching, if you were from Stockton, California, did you ever go to the Islander? If you did, comment in the comment section below.
And what's interesting about that
well, you never made it inside, though.
I think I have, but I don't remember. And I know my parents used to go there for special events and occasions.
But if you went to the Islander, you had three mugs then.
They had more.
They had even more.
Okay. If you look online, the Islander really bought a lot of the OMC mugs. I don't think they cared. They bought, I want to say 7, 8, 9. They bought a lot of OMC mugs. There's a smiling, goofy guy, I forget what he's called, which is kind of like the cannibal, but it's smiling. You've seen it, very crude mug. There's a kind of a rare green Maori mug with a green glaze. That's an OMC mug. It's a bit rare. That Islander was one of the restaurants that bought. That there was this Hurricane Thor Heyerdahl Tiki inspired mug. A guy named Andres Bumate, who was a tiki carver in the 60s, actually carved this, and I believe he was influenced by Thor Heyerdahl's tiki. This is the tiki that used to be on this big, huge, multi-story marquee next to the A-frame of the restaurant. And so the Islander bought a lot of these. But two things are interesting about the Islander and OMC. One is, if you're a collector and maybe there's a defunct bar in, say, Columbus, Ohio, or remember there were tiki, and they had tiki, and we're talking, at the Islander, we're talking 1963 essentially to 1980. This was a going concern. This was has a Chinese restaurant, steakhouse, and tiki bar with a nightclub attached inside. Yeah, Latitude 20, I believe it was called. But you could go to your hometown in the 60s, if you go to history, and you think about the defunct Chinese restaurants and tiki bars at the heyday of tiki, and they probably bought these same mugs. And you say Harvey's in Lake Tahoe, boom, you'll find the bucket mugs. Yeah. And although they're relatively inexpensive, if you have a connection like I do to Stockton, you can get these mugs and you can talk about the history of what has been in your hometown. Because, Stockton, and even when I lived there in the 70s, that was just a farming town, getting a little big, and it was not a not a mainstay of a big city tiki nightclub culture, but there was this amazing restaurant there.
I'm guessing probably back then there probably wasn't too many different manufacturers that were actually making tiki mugs anyway.
Right.
So you probably didn't have a lot of choices.
But who are you competing against? I mean, you're in Stockton, California. Right? And you've got you're Columbus, Ohio, which back then was not as big or prominent as it is today. You're in somewhere in Texas, where they used to have those Chinese restaurants or tiki bars.
That's a good point. Yeah, you're talking about cities that 30, 40 years ago were definitely a lot smaller.
Yeah. And sure, they're competing against San Francisco, but they're their own thing. They're not going to...
And people back then probably, I'm guessing, to drive from San Francisco to Stockton, California would have been like a journey.
For some. For me, it was nothing because my family lived in both cities. But even then, San Francisco was the big city. It was, in fact, when I moved, we would my grandmother, who lived in San Francisco, would visit us and say to her, she'd be on the phone to her friends and goes with her Irish brogue, "I'm in the country. I'm in Stockton, a city of 150 at the time, 1,000 people, but I'm in the country." And, and we say, I tell my father when I spent my summers in high school and college, I'm going to the city and staying with my family. Well, that meant San Francisco. It's just that sort of thing. But a lot of cities. So you would get the mugs. And like I say, the Islander was aggressive about it. The interesting thing is we go from OMC as a Japanese concern and Japanese into Chinese in tiki. So the famous Hop Louie, who I believe was the same Hop Louie who made in Los Angeles, there's a 5-story tall pagoda.
Yeah, I wanted to
in
go to
Chinatown.
That
Yeah.
Oh man.
And named after Hop Louie. It was originally, I think, called the Golden Pagoda.
Yeah.
1941. Hop Louie acquired it and had his name to it. Well, Hop Louie, and I believe the same Hop Louie, founded the Islander in Stockton, which is kind of weird. Los Angeles to Stockton is a trek. And in 1963. And in 1966, he sold it to a gentleman called Tommy Lee. And so it was
not to be confused with the drummer from MUGS.
Exactly.
I had to make some joke.
And the legend has it that Hop Louie lost in a gambling debt the Islander to Tommy Lee, who ran the Islander as a tiki Chinese restaurant, steakhouse, and tiki bar and nightclub until about 1980. So 63 to 80, the height of tiki. You can see the evolution of tiki and tiki plus Chinese in that rise and fall. And
that is a good point that people forget sometimes. It's like the food that was being served at these restaurants, it was not Hawaiian food.
No,
it was pseudo Chinese food,
Chinese,
or Chinese food.
Chinese food with pineapple, right? It was the chop suey, and then Cantonese, primarily type Chinese food, and then Chinese food with pineapple. Which, when I was growing up, and still today, I love that. But that's not really authentic food. That's more of a Americanized. But people weren't serving poi or spam or true Polynesian food at these restaurants. They were serving Chinese food.
Yeah.
And you and I have discussed, and I asked you your thoughts. And the interface, there was an interesting Eater article a few years ago that was the pre-tiki and tiki bars were serving Chinese food. And then the Chinese restaurants were serving tiki drinks. And they were getting their mugs from OMC. Many of them.
I remember seeing, those are the first places I remember seeing those drinks on a menu.
Yeah.
Was at Chinese restaurants.
Yeah. And many of them wanted the mugs. And OMC said, you want the mugs? And if you want, I'll stamp the name of your restaurant over the butt crack of the peanut.
And there you go.
There you go. And interestingly, going back to the Chinese connection, Chinese-American connection, Hop Louie, and his wife was Hop Louie Wu. His wife was Minnie Wu.
Minnie Wu.
And I never knew about this. In nearby Stockton, relatively speaking, is Modesto, California.
Okay.
And I'm a huge, huge Simpsons fan, or the first 15 to 20 seasons, huge Simpsons fan.
Oh, is that it?
Is that it? Yeah. Well, my interest flagged after 20 years, but that's okay. And one of my favorite episodes is season 4, Red Fish, Blue Fish, which is about eating fugu.
Oh, okay.
Fugu is a puffer fish, the Japanese word for puffer fish. And Heidi insisted that when we had this bar, that we get a puffer fish. We actually have two. One's lit, one's not. And so one of my favorite finds on eBay was Mr. Fugu.
Let me see.
The puffer fish
Let
mug.
me see it. Mr.
And this
Fugu?
is a Tiki Farm mug. Yep. And Little Fugu, which I found years later, which Little Fugu cost me as much on eBay or more than Mr. Fugu. This was a hard find.
But it says Minnie's. Modesto, California.
Modesto, California, which was a Chinese restaurant named after Minnie Wu, Hop Louie Wu's wife. And I did not know that until recently, that Minnie Wu...
No, wait, was this a mug for Minnie's, or is it
It's a mug for Minnie's Chinese restaurant in Modesto, California, named after Hop Louie's wife. See, we're coming full circle here. And coincidentally, I bought it because of the Japanese fugu connection. And, by the way, monkeys with fezzes are my thing. And it just happened to be, coincidentally, when I got it off eBay or Etsy, from Minnie's. And I recently found out that Minnie's was named after, which just unfortunately closed with COVID, the Chinese restaurant, I know. I don't know if it's closed permanently, but it may be. But was named after Minnie Wu, and I did some research. And Little Fugu.
All right, so it says Little Fugu, but it doesn't say Minnie's on the back, but it's pretty small though.
And it's a Tiki Farm, not an OMC mug. And so what's great about this is that we've come full circle to the original owner of the Islander. We went from the Japanese connection, the Japanese American, the mug manufacturer, to the guy who founded the Islander, to the restaurant named after his wife, which coincidentally has the Japanese name for pufferfish, which is on the Simpsons side is when Homer eats fugu, trying sushi for the first time, and goes in the hospital and thinks he's going to die of poisoning. We come almost completely full circle. And then this last mug.
Yeah, what's the story with this moai?
So this moai is an OMC moai. Now, most of the OMCs, you notice during this taping, I keep looking underneath them all.
Yeah.
OMC would always, not always, but I assume always, put a little sticker underneath their mugs. But because it's just a little sticker, it would get washed away, especially if you use the mugs.
Okay.
And if you notice, there's a little OMC sticker there, which is the
Odagiri
Mercantile Company, OMC.
So this is it. So this is
it. This is OMC mug.
For the Tiki's Monterey Park, California.
So Monterey Park is in the greater LA metropolitan neighborhood. And what happened was my sister in Stockton, California bought the family home from my parents. And when Heidi and I built our own home tiki bar, my sister and her husband came down and they gifted me with this. They found this in the family home, and I'm guessing it was from 1962 because my parents went on their honeymoon in 1962 to the greater Los Angeles region. And it's from a Monterey Park defunct tiki bar called The Tiki's, and I've looked it up, and it's a tiki bar long gone. And they bought an OMC mug, and this is what happens with the OMC mugs, is that they're labeled somewhere from a restaurant, and it happened to be in the shelf for 40, 50 years unused. That's why the label's still on it, because it's probably only been washed once or twice and not used for drinks. My sister finds it, gifts it to me. And my whole thing about the OMC mugs is what's cool about them is that they're, except for the Bob's and a couple others, they're relatively inexpensive. You can find them at thrift stores. You can find them on eBay, Etsy, some other places. But you can find them and that they have some meaning to you, to your small town defunct tiki bar, to where you used to be from, to Tiki Bob's, which every tiki aficionado aspires to have, to a place that I think my parents got on a honeymoon, sitting away a shelf for over 40 years, that now I'm happy to have it because it has a connection. My father died last year and my mother's been deceased for 20 years, over 20 years, has meaning to me. And yet it's tiki, and so it sits with pride on my mug. And it's not a fancy mug. It's not an expensive mug. It looks nice. But this OMC mass-produced mugs and the labeling of all the different restaurants and bars just can have some meaning to you. And it's a great way to inexpensively collect bars in an area where tiki mugs have gotten so expensive.
Okay. I love the old tiki mugs, because there is history to them. Mm-hmm. And I love, like at the end, like when it comes down to all this, it's like I love the tiki bars, the tiki restaurants themselves more than anything. Yeah, I love my drinks, but I love these places. I love these tiki palaces that used to be around. And I love the fact that, the place may be long gone or leveled, but at least you can still have a little piece of that place right here.